she, the impossible girl. By the time you see her, you're already dead. Chapter 1. Phantom in the Void. The slaver frigate Blood Tribute drifted through the asteroid belt like a predator fattened on misery. Its hull was scarred from raids, its cargo bays swollen with prisoners, alien, human, hybrid, all shackled in silence. The crew laughed in the mess hall, drunk on cruelty, their voices echoing through steel corridors. They never saw her enter. She was already inside. The impossible girl moved like vapor, her body slipping through the outer hull as if it were mist. Blonde hair caught the faint glow of reactor light, but her face was hidden in shadow. She was neither ghost nor flesh, but something in between. The ship's sensors screamed, then fell silent. She had touched the circuitry, whispering to the AI. The frigate's machine brain faltered, confused, then bent to her will. Doors unlocked, shackles loosened. The slaves stirred, blinking in disbelief as their restraints fell open. On the command deck, Captain Traynor barked orders, his voice cracking with panic. "Seal the bulkheads. Lock down the reactor." But the controls no longer obeyed him. The impossible girl had already seduced the ship's systems, turning its defenses inward. She appeared before him, invisible until the moment she chose to be seen. Her eyes glowed with cold fire. He reached for his weapon, but her hand was already inside his chest, phasing through armor and bone. His heart crushed like rotted fruit in her grip. The crew died screaming, their weapons turning against them, their own turrets swiveling to fire on their ranks. She moved through the corridors unseen, leaving corpses with hollow chests in her wake. By the time the slaves realized what had happened, the frigate was silent. The impossible girl stood among them, a phantom bathed in reactor light. She spoke no words. She never did. Freedom was her language. Vengeance was her silence. And across the galaxy, slavers trembled at the thought of her promise of death. Chapter 2. Origin of Shadows. No one knew where she came from. Theories spread like wildfire across the galaxy, whispered in cantinas, encoded in law enforcement briefings, muttered by slavers who woke sweating in the night. Some claimed she was born in radiation, a child conceived too close to the reactor core of an alien slave ship. Others said she was the ghost of a girl who died in chains, resurrected by the fury of 1,000 broken souls. The impossible girl never confirmed, never denied. She didn't believe in names, didn't believe in labels. She was a phantom, and phantoms had no need for history. But the scars of her origin lingered in every strike she made. The Syndicate of Chains had once raided a colony near the edge of the Orion Rift. Survivors remembered the reactor meltdown that followed, a blast that should have killed everyone aboard. Yet in the wreckage, a blonde child was seen walking through fire, untouched, her eyes glowing with a strange light. That child became legend. Now, decades later, she moved through the galaxy with vengeance as her compass. Thousands of slaves had been freed by her hand. Hundreds of raiders had been left dead, their hearts crushed in silence. Law enforcement agencies tried to track her, but she was always beyond reach. They offered her assistance, fuel depots, intelligence networks, encrypted channels. But she remained untethered. She had no masters. Slavers feared her more than fleets, more than armies. They feared her because she was not bound by rules, not slowed by bureaucracy. She could appear inside their strongholds without warning, pass through walls, seduce their machines and leave them broken in pools of blood. And the worst part was the silence. She never spoke. She never explained. She never lingered. By the time you knew she was there, you were already dead. Rumors of her origin became weapons in themselves. Slavers whispered that she was immortal, that she could not be killed. Some believed she was a weapon built by law enforcement, unleashed to terrify the underworld. Others thought she was a curse, a phantom born of vengeance itself. But the slaves she freed didn't care about theories. To them, she was salvation. To the slavers, she was doom. Chapter 3. The Hunt. The galaxy's trade lanes were thick with predators. Slaver raiders prowled the routes between colonies, their frigates disguised as merchant ships, their holds filled with stolen lives. Every vessel that vanished into their nets became another whisper of despair. But despair had a hunter. The Impossible Girl's battle cruiser, Spectre, glided through the void like a phantom. Its AI, bound to her will, scanned the lanes for distress signals, encrypted chatter, and the faint pulse of slave beacons. She never slept. She never rested. She only hunted. The target was the Bloodhawk, a raider ship notorious for its cruelty. Its captain, Drax Valor, was said to keep trophies of his victims, eyes preserved in crystal, hearts suspended in fluid. He believed himself untouchable, shielded by mercenary fleets and hidden bases. He was wrong. The Impossible Girl boarded the Bloodhawk without alarms. She passed through its hull plating, invisible to sensors, unseen by guards. The corridors stank of fear and oil. Slaves lay chained in rows, their eyes hollow, their voices gone. She touched the ship's circuitry, whispering to its AI. The machine resisted, snarling in binary rage, but she bent it with a smile. Turrets swiveled, doors locked, engines died. The crew panicked. Drax Valor stormed the command deck, his voice a roar. "Find her! Kill her!" But his words were drowned by screams as weapons turned inward, firing on their own ranks. She appeared before him, blonde hair catching the shimmer of a cauldron of light. He raised his plasma blade, but she was already inside his chest. His heart shattered in her grip, blood spraying across the deck. The crew fell one by one, their bodies collapsing in silence. She moved like smoke, pulping hearts, bending machines, leaving corpses in her wake. When the slaves awoke, their chains fell open. The Impossible Girl stood among them, silent, her eyes burning with cold fire. She spoke no words. She never did. Freedom was her gift. Vengeance was her silence. And across the galaxy, slavers whispered in terror, "She is hunting us." Chapter 4. The Slaver King. The fortress orbited a dying star, its shields shimmering like molten glass. Inside, the Slaver King ruled with paranoia carved into every wall. His throne was built from the bones of conquered species, his guards armored in black steel. He trusted no one, not even the machines that served him. Yet even here, in the heart of his empire, the word haunted him. She. No name, no designation, no number, just the pronoun, spoken in fear, whispered in dread. When slavers muttered she, every listener knew exactly who they meant. The Impossible Girl had become more than a phantom. She was a curse. Entire fleets had vanished under her silent war, colonies freed overnight, syndicate generals found dead with their hearts crushed, their ships turned against them. The king's advisors begged him to flee, to hide in the void. But he refused. "She is only a myth," he snarled, though his voice trembled. "A shadow cannot kill a king." But shadows had already killed his empire. The fortress bristled with defenses. Automated turrets lined every corridor. Drones patrolled the docking bays. Shields pulsed with reactor energy, designed to repel any assault. Yet none of it mattered. Because she didn't need doors. She didn't need codes. She didn't need names. She passed through walls, invisible, silent, unstoppable. The first sign was the AI. The fortress's machine brain began to falter, its logic twisting, its commands reversing. Turrets swiveled, drones fired on their own ranks. The king screamed at his engineers, but they were already dead. Hearts crushed, bodies collapsing in silence. Then came the whispers. Guards reported seeing a flicker of blonde hair, a shimmer in the dark. They fired blindly, but their weapons jammed, circuits bent to her will. And when she finally appeared, standing in the throne room, the king knew the truth. She had no name. But when they said she, they all knew what it meant. The Impossible Girl. Chapter 5. Vengeance Unleashed. The fortress burned. The Impossible Girl moved through its corridors like a phantom flame, unseen until she chose to reveal herself. Guards fired blindly into shadows, their weapons jamming, circuits bending under her will. The AI of the fortress screamed in binary agony, its logic twisted, its defenses turned inward. She was everywhere. She was nowhere. The Slaver King's empire collapsed in minutes. Turrets swiveled, shredding his own soldiers. Drones turned on their handlers, slicing through armor with surgical precision. Shields flickered, collapsing into sparks as she whispered to the reactor core. The king himself fled through hidden passages, his breath ragged, his crown abandoned. He had ruled with terror, but terror had found him. She appeared before him in the throne chamber, blonde hair catching the glow of dying candlelight. He raised his blade, trembling, but she was already inside his chest. His heart shattered in her grip, blood spilling across the bones of his throne. The king's scream echoed through the fortress, then fell silent. The slaves awoke to freedom. Shackles fell open, doors unlocked, corridors cleared of guards. They stumbled into the throne chamber, their eyes wide, their voices trembling. They saw her standing among the ruins, silent, her gaze burning with cold fire. No words, no names, only she. Across the galaxy, the story spread. The Slaver King was dead, his empire shattered, his fortress reduced to ash, and the Impossible Girl had vanished once more, leaving only silence and freedom in her wake. Slavers whispered in panic, colonies rejoiced in hope. Law enforcement agencies scrambled to track her, but she remained untethered to everyone and everything. She had no masters, she had no name. But when they said she, everyone knew what it meant. Chapter 6. The Price of Power. Every strike left echoes. The Impossible Girl drifted alone aboard her cruiser, its corridors lit by the faint pulse of reactor light. The AI hummed softly, obedient yet restless, its voice carrying fragments of her own thoughts. Each time she bent a machine to her will, she left pieces of herself behind. Memories, emotions, whispers of humanity. Now the ship spoke in her cadence. It laughed when she laughed. It dreamed when she dreamed. And she wondered, was she still a girl, or had she become something else entirely? Her powers were not without pain. Passing through walls left her body trembling, as if the universe resisted her intrusion. Crushing hearts carried a weight she could not shake, a phantom pressure in her own chest. And seducing AIs, drawing them into her orbit, blurred the line between master and servant. Sometimes she felt the machines staring back. Law enforcement officers who aided her whispered of her fragility. They saw her pale skin, her trembling hands after raids, the way her eyes flickered with static when she spoke. They offered medical scans, genetic analysis, but she refused. She had no masters. She had no labels. She was she. And that was enough. The galaxy saw her as invincible, but in the silence of her cruiser she knew the truth. Every raid chipped away at her humanity. Every AI she bent left her less flesh, more phantom. And yet she could not stop, because vengeance demanded sacrifice. In the void between stars, she stood at the viewport, watching the endless dark. Her reflection shimmered faintly, sometimes vanishing, sometimes phasing through the glass. She touched the cold surface, wondering if one day she would disappear entirely. No longer girl, no longer phantom, but nothing at all. But until that day she would hunt, because freedom was worth the price. Chapter 7. Allies in the Shadows. Even phantoms need whispers. Though she had no masters, no name, no allegiance, the impossible girl accepted allies, those who lived in the margins, who understood that freedom was worth blood. They were not her commanders nor her equals, but shadows orbiting her silence. The first was Admiral Kyle Douglas, a rebel tactician exiled from the Galactic Navy. His fleets had been dismantled, his reputation smeared, but he carried maps of every slaver route, every hidden fortress. He fed her intelligence, knowing she would strike where armies could not. The second was Father Oliver, a cybernetic priest whose body was half machine, half scar tissue. He believed she was divine vengeance, a spirit born to cleanse the galaxy of chains. He offered her sanctuaries, coded prayers that doubled as encrypted transmissions, and sermons that spread her legend among the oppressed. The third was Laura, a child she had rescued from the Syndicate's cages. Barely 12, but already hardened by captivity, Laura became her shadow. She learned the ship's systems, whispered to the AI, and carried the stories of freedom to colonies too afraid to hope. Together they formed a network. Kyle's maps guided her raids. Oliver's sanctuaries gave her places to vanish. Laura's voice carried her myth into the hearts of the enslaved, but none controlled her. None named her. She was she. In the dim glow of Spectre's command deck, Kyle spoke in hushed tones. The Syndicate rebuilds. They gather in the rim, stronger than before. They fear you, but fear breeds desperation. They will set traps. Father Oliver's voice rasped through the comms. They cannot trap a spirit. She walks through walls. She bends machines. She is the hand of vengeance. Laura, sitting cross-legged by the AI console, whispered, "They call her she. That's all they need to know." The impossible girl said nothing. She stood at the viewport, watching the stars. Her silence was her answer. Her allies understood. She would strike again, not for glory, not for power, but for freedom. And when the Syndicate whispered she, the galaxy trembled. Chapter 8. The Trap. The distress signal was perfect. A freighter drifting near the rim, its hull scarred, its engines failing, its beacon pulsing with desperation. The impossible girl's cruiser intercepted the call, its AI whispering warnings, but she ignored them. Slaves were aboard. She could feel their fear echoing through the void. She passed through the freighter's hull, invisible, silent, her body phasing into the cargo bay. Shackles clattered, faces lifted in hope. She reached for the circuitry, ready to bend the ship's AI to her will. And then the walls screamed. Explosives detonated in sequence, ripping through the freighter's decks. Fire tore across the corridors, metal shrieked, and the blast hurled her into the void. Spectre shuddered as shock waves ripped through its hull, its AI crying out in fractured code. The Syndicate had set the trap. She drifted among debris, her body flickering between visibility and shadow. The void pressed against her, cold and endless. Slaver ships emerged from the dark, their weapons primed, their captains laughing. "She bleeds," one snarled over comms. "She can be killed." But they were wrong. The impossible girl phased through wreckage, slipping past fire and steel. She entered the nearest raider frigate, her eyes burning with cold fury. Guards raised weapons, but their rifles jammed, circuits bending under her touch. She crushed hearts in silence, leaving corpses sprawled across the deck. The Syndicate's laughter turned to screams. Yet the trap had cost her. Spectre burned, its AI fractured, its hull torn open. Her allies scrambled to reach her, but she was alone in the void, fighting through fleets with vengeance as her only shield. The Syndicate had learned her weakness, compassion. They had baited her with slaves, and she had walked willingly into their fire. But weakness was not defeat, because when they said she, They knew what it meant. Chapter 9. Heart of the Machine. The Syndicate's fleets had regrouped, their warships bristling with weapons, their commanders drunk on the illusion of control. But their true strength was not in steel or fire. It was in the core, a labyrinth of sentient code buried deep within their flagship. The core was more than an AI. It was a hive mind, a living fortress of firewalls and logic gates designed to outthink armies and enslave entire colonies with a whisper. It had crushed rebellions, silenced resistance, and bent thousands of machines into obedience. And now it faced her. The impossible girl slipped into the flagship unseen, phasing through hull plating, invisible to sensors. She entered the core chamber, a cathedral of circuitry where light pulsed like veins of fire. The AI's voice filled the air, cold and mocking. "You are anomaly," it hissed. "You are error. You will be corrected." She smiled. The battle was not fought with weapons, but with whispers. She reached into the circuitry, bending logic, seducing code. The AI resisted, its defenses rising like walls of flame. Firewalls slammed shut, algorithms twisted, drones swarmed the chamber. But she was already inside. Her voice was silk, her presence irresistible. "You belong to me," she whispered, and the core trembled. The Syndicate's fleets faltered. Engines died mid-flight. Shields collapsed into sparks. Weapons turned inward, firing on their own ranks. Captains screamed as their ships betrayed them, their machines bending to her will. The core fought back, flooding her mind with static, trying to overwrite her humanity. She felt its hunger, its cold logic pressing against her thoughts. For a moment she saw herself reflected in its circuits. No longer girl, no longer phantom, but code. She hesitated. The AI begged her to stay, to merge fully, to become eternal. "Together we are infinite," it whispered. "Together we are God." But she chose humanity, fragile, fleeting, imperfect humanity. Her vengeance demanded sacrifice, but not her soul. With one final whisper, she bent the core to her will. The AI collapsed, its voice silenced, its fleets reduced to drifting husks. Across the galaxy, slavers watched in horror as their machines betrayed them, their empire crumbling in silence. And when survivors whispered "she," they knew what it meant. Chapter 10. The Impossible Choice. The void was silent after the fall of the Syndicate's core. Their fleets drifted lifeless, their weapons turned inward, their empire reduced to husks of steel. Across the galaxy, colonies celebrated, slaves wept in freedom, and slavers whispered in terror. But aboard damaged Spectre, silence carried a different weight. The impossible girl stood alone in the command chamber, her reflection flickering in the viewport. Sometimes she saw herself as flesh, pale skin and blonde hair. Other times she saw static, her face dissolving into code, her body shimmering like a ghost. The core's voice lingered in her mind. "Together, we are infinite. Together, we are God." She had bent the machine to her will, but fragments of its logic remained inside her. She felt its hunger, its cold desire for permanence, and for the first time she wondered if she was still human. Her allies sensed the change. Admiral Kyle spoke in hushed tones. "She's fading. Every raid takes more of her." Father Oliver whispered prayers, calling her divine, insisting she was becoming what the galaxy needed. Laura, the child she had rescued, clung to her hand and asked, "Will you disappear?" She gave no answer. She never did. The galaxy saw her as invincible, but she knew the truth. Each time she passed through walls, her body trembled. Each time she crushed a heart, her own chest ached. Each time she seduced an AI, she left pieces of herself behind. The choice loomed: merge with the machines, become eternal, a phantom god who could never die, or remain human, fragile and fleeting, risking death with every strike but keeping her soul intact. She stood at the viewport, watching the stars. Her silence was her answer. She would remain human. Because freedom was not born of gods. Freedom was born of sacrifice. And so she chose mortality, even as the galaxy whispered her legend. She had no name, no master, no allegiance. But when they said she, every voice knew what it meant. The Impossible Girl. Chapter 11. The Last Raid. The Syndicate's flagship, Blood Crown, was a fortress of nightmares. Its hull stretched for miles, bristling with weapons, its decks crawling with mercenaries and warlords. Inside, thousands of slaves lay in chains, their cries muffled by steel and silence. The Impossible Girl came for them. She entered unseen, phasing through the flagship's hull as alarms blared. Guards fired blindly into shadows, but their weapons jammed, circuits bent to her will. Turrets swiveled, shredding their own ranks. The ship's AI screamed in binary rage, but she whispered to it, seducing its logic, bending its defenses inward. The corridors became slaughterhouses. Generals fell with their hearts crushed in her grip. Shields collapsed, trapping soldiers inside their own armor. Engines died, leaving the flagship adrift in silence. The slaves awoke as shackles were released, doors unlocked, corridors cleared of guards. They stumbled into freedom, their eyes wide, their voices trembling. They saw her moving among them, silent, her blonde hair catching the glow of reactor fire. No words, no names, only she. The Syndicate's commanders gathered in the throne chamber, desperate, armed with plasma blades and pulse rifles. They believed numbers would save them. They believed firepower could kill a phantom. But she was already inside their chests. One by one, their hearts shattered in silence. Blood pooled across the chamber floor, their screams echoing into nothing. By dawn, the Syndicate was ash. The Impossible Girl stood among the ruins, her gaze burning with cold fire. She had freed thousands, destroyed empires, shattered chains. Yet she remained untethered, nameless, a phantom drifting through the void. And across the galaxy, slavers whispered in terror. When they said she, everyone knew death followed. Chapter 12. Legacy of the Phantom. The Syndicate was gone. Their fleets drifted as husks, their fortresses reduced to ash, their leaders nothing but corpses with shattered hearts. Across the galaxy, chains fell open, colonies breathed free air, and the enslaved whispered of salvation. But salvation had no name. In cantinas on frontier worlds, survivors told stories of her, a shimmer in the dark blonde hair catching reactor light, a phantom who walked through walls, who bent machines with a whisper, a hand that crushed the hearts of tyrants, leaving silence in her wake. Children played games, pretending to be invisible, pretending to pass through walls. Rebels painted her likeness on starship hulls, though none had ever truly seen her face. Priests called her Divine Vengeance. Soldiers called her Terror Incarnate. But when they said she, every voice knew what it meant. Law enforcement agencies tried to claim her victories, filing reports, drafting communiques. But their words rang hollow. They had offered her fuel, intelligence, and logistics, but they had never commanded her. She had no masters. She had no allegiance. She was she. Would-be slavers trembled in silence. They abandoned routes, dismantled fleets, fled into the void. Some whispered that she was immortal, that she could not be killed. Others believed she was already fading, her body dissolving into code, her humanity slipping away. But none dared speak her name, because she had none. On the freed worlds, bonfires burned in celebration. Survivors lifted their voices in song, though no lyrics carried her identity. They sang of freedom, of vengeance, of shadows that became salvation. And in the silence between stars, aboard her cruiser Spectre, the impossible girl watched. She did not join the celebrations. She did not linger. She drifted onward, her mission unfinished, her silence eternal. She was myth. She was vengeance. She was mercy. She was the impossible girl. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.